welcome back to my channel. My name is Leela and this is my beautiful black cat Selenite, and I love to read queer, trans, and feminist literature. And today we are going to be reading some weird girl lit. Feminist literary fiction is truly my favorite genre, so I am really excited about this TBR. First up on the TBR, we've got Woo Woo by Ella Baxter. This book came out in 2024 and it's been on my radar. I've been wanting to read it and I am really excited to finally get into it. I do know that something about this book involves TikTok, so maybe the timing is finally right for me because I just recently started posting on TikTok, so now I can finally relate to what it's like to be a successful artist who is also TikTok famous. And then we've got Pink Slime by Fernanda Trias, and this is translated from Spanish. I found this from browsing and just like pulled it off the shelf out of interest in its pink and red cover, let's be honest. And I noticed that it was translated by Heather Cleary, who also translated Thirst, another pink and red feminist literary fiction novel, which I loved. This is about bisexual vampires and love and sex and death and everything you could ever want from a book. It was so addictive, I could not put it down. I highly recommend Thirst for your Valentine's reading season, by the way. So I am really excited about this, and it says, in a city ravaged by a mysterious plague, a woman tries to understand why her world is falling apart. An algae bloom has poisoned the previously pristine air that blows in from the sea. In the short, desperate breaks between deadly windstorms, our narrator stubbornly tends to her few remaining relationships, with her difficult but vulnerable mother, with the ex-husband for whom she still harbors feelings, and with the boy she nannies, whose parents sent him away even as terrible threats loomed. Yet as conditions outside deteriorate further, her commitment to remaining in place only grows, even if staying means being left behind. This unforgettable novel explores the beauty and fragility of our most intimate relationships and the moments in life when love, responsibility, and self-preservation converge. That sounds very relevant. And this was published in Spanish in 2020 and then in English in 2024. I have actually started Woo Woo. I'm actually obsessed with it. I have read up to page 73, so I'm about a third of the way through. And I've of course been using this pink and red bookmark from Le Gallienne Feminist Bookstore in Montreal, which matches and which I love. Even the back with this quote from Lucie Bersianic matches the eye. This book is a thrilling and eccentric novel about what it means to make art as a woman and about the powerful forces of voyeurism, obsession, and online performance. Woo Woo follows Sabine, a conceptual artist on the verge of an exhibition of self-portraits she hopes will be pivotal as she plunges deeper into her neuroses and seeks validation in relationships with her frustratingly rational chef husband, her horde of devoted Gen Z TikTok followers, and even a mysterious, potentially violent stalker. Accompanying her throughout are Sabine's strange and alter egos, from hyper-realistic puppets of her as a baby to the ghost of conceptual artist Carolee Schneemann, who shows up with inscrutable yet sage life advice. Ella Baxter approaches the desire to see and be seen that defines both the creative and romantic act with humor, empathy, and a good dose of wildness, driving Sabine to a surreal and compelling climax that forces her and us to reconsider what it means to be an artist and a partner. Really, really, really compelling. I love Carolee Schneemann. I remember when I was traveling in Europe and going to museums and I saw footage of her iconic piece, Interior Scroll, in which she pulls out like writing about a train that is death from her vagina. Anyway, I'm loving this book so far. I'm loving the references to artists that I love, like Carolee Schneemann, as well as so far Tracey Emin, who is known for her iconic piece My Bed, where she made like an art installation of her bed post-breakup. Love Dorothea Lasky, who's like my favorite poet's favorite poet. My literary mother, Melissa Broder, loves Dorothea Lasky, and I met Dorothea Lasky when she hosted the conversation for Melissa Broder's recent book launch at the Strand, and saw her read and definitely fell in love with her. And my girlfriend and I went up to her and she responded to us like we were all old friends and asked us about astrology, and we were like, yes. She also cites Sappho, obviously classical lesbian poet whom we love and adore, and Jenny Holzer, feminist artist known for her statements like men don't protect you anymore. My girlfriend and I actually went to her recent retrospective at the Guggenheim and I was really moved by it. Like her work goes so deep into like American politics and the Iraq War. Like that was really affecting. Flipping through a little, I saw that Ella Baxter also cites Hélène Cixous, the French feminist linguist known for her theory of écriture féminine, which I'm obsessed with, and also cites the Malleus Maleficarum, the handbook for witch hunters in the early modern witch trials in Europe. So basically, I'm deeply obsessed. I was a little bit stressed when on page 6 describing Sabine's artwork, it says, think of the collection as blinding flashes of light across a defiant, nude, cis female body. I was really stressed that that could potentially be a turf flag and that me and this text would have a lot in common, but then be in like serious conflict over trans liberation because of the way that it said a defiant cis female body. But God X bless. In reading on, it became clear to me that that was not a turf flag. I think it was more so an indication of Sabine's character and the kind of way that her art is engaged in a feminist project, but is maybe not the most deeply engaged with a coherent analysis of collective liberation beyond her own self. And I first came to know that on page 21. She's talking to her friends. "You're more privileged than us, being a white man," said Ruth. "I'm trans. You need to read a book," said Lou. "You're absolutely right," said Sabine, immediately ready to prove herself a greater ally than Ruth. Like, okay, I understand where we are now and I love it. There were other funny moments like that. Like at one point, Sabine is like scared that she's being stalked and she thinks of calling the police, but then she's like, "A cab." But then later she realized that her conviction that all cops are bastards is not as important to her as doing whatever it takes to feel safe, and that like moral position kind of goes out the window really fast. And I feel like these sort of like ironic jokes are serving to indicate that like Sabine doesn't necessarily have strong analysis or moral convictions, and that's just kind of like her characterization. She has strong self-interest, and that is explored like really hilariously throughout the text. I'm obsessed. Alessandra saw me reading it and was like, "Is this kind of my year of rest and relaxation core?" And I was like, 100%, which I love. And so Sabine is like live streaming performance art on TikTok, and then on page 44 she's being interviewed for a magazine in anticipation of her gallery opening and says, "I've captured freedom, haven't I?" And the reporter responds, "No, not freedom per se, but rather an alternative, a fantasy of reality." And I found that so resonant and compelling in terms of commentary on social media performance and how it really does offer us a fantasy of reality that is an alternative to freedom when we are living in such times as these of late stage capitalism, rising fascism, climate crisis, etc. Going online and projecting a fantasy can really feel like a relief and an escape, but doesn't change that, and in fact only enriches the tech billionaires who own the private social media platforms. It really gives me a lot to think about and reflect on. She also mentions millennial pink on page 17, and I love millennial pink so much, but specifically in a way that really connects to what Ione Gamble wrote in her book, Poor Little Sick Girls, about millennial pink. Gamble wrote, "While the fourth wave feminist movement began by using millennial pink as a shiny veneer that opened up people's worlds to the darker, more nuanced politics of existing in a femme body, the aesthetic is now once again being used by corporations and skinny cisgender white women to mask a multitude of sins in the mainstream commodified feminist movement." And I am interested in all of that. Like, I of course love the like Rookie magazine Petra Collins pale pink post-Riot Girl exploration of dark femininity, and I am also really interested in girl boss feminism and its potentialities and darknesses and implications in a larger context of liberal feminism and commodified feminism. Anyway, this text really connects me to all of that, which really makes me feel inspired and alive. This book also really inspires me to cut my bangs and maybe go see some art. In my writing club, we have Tarot Thursday where we all pick a card at the beginning of the session, and I drew the Queen of Cups, and I did take this image as a sign to acquire more light pink wardrobe items. So I was thinking maybe I could also thrift. Anyway, I will check back in with you with my next update. I have read up until page 149 in Woo Woo. I'm obsessed with this book. It is so good. This is that absolute 5-star feeling for me. I love this book. I am entranced. Something very dramatic and compelling just happened. I am hooked. I laughed out loud when the protagonist went to a self-defense class and her trainer said, "You can cancel me if you want, but women are absolute psychos." And I find this protagonist's actual art, as described, like actually very compelling. On page 132, 133, there are these descriptions of the art that she is displaying in her gallery show, and they're full of all these references to like feminine archetypes and goddesses, and I love that. And my favorites are Hecate, number 12, and Lilith, number 13. Love that. I also wanted to take a moment to just like appreciate the beauty of this physical book. Obviously, I'm obsessed with this cover design, but also the binding is this perfect pale pink that I'm obsessed with, and the actual hardcover is black, which I love, and then the text on the spine. Sorry to Alessandra, my girlfriend, whose pet peeve is me cracking the spines of books, is pink. So I love that. Also, I went to Hive Mind to restock my Major Arcana mystery books, which are like a blind date with a book / tarot reading, where there's like a wrapped book with a tarot card on the outside, and then inside I've written like a little tarot reading and corresponding book recommendation of like a queer or trans book. And anyway, while I was doing that, I was listening to the audiobook of Intention Obsession by Erica Feldman. I read her previous book and loved it. She is the owner of the store House Witch in Salem, Massachusetts, and she is like a lesbian feminist witch, and I really connect with her. And anyway, I really enjoyed listening to that audiobook. I'm still in the middle of it, and I learned that lilac, a meaning of my name, one of my favorite flowers, which is Persian in origin, like me, and blossoms in Montreal, my hometown, every spring around my birthday, is apparently a favorite flower of the fairies. So that was really exciting to learn. I finished Woo Woo. I finished it just after midnight last night, and I loved this book. I loved it. I was expecting the stakes to like keep on rising until the very end, and I did find that it kind of had a more peaceful conclusion than I was expecting, but like I think that was part of the story, and that's really beautiful. Speaking of the beauty of the story, I love the romantic relationship in this story. I think it is my favorite straight relationship that I have ever read about. I am generally really in favor of straight divorce. Like, I support gay marriage and straight divorce, but in this case, I was really rooting for them. Like, I loved them and I wanted them to get through it and stick together. And I think it's because like I really loved the way that Sabine, the protagonist's husband, supports her, and I love how he seems like really secure in himself. I also loved the sex scene. I just found it to be like really compelling literary writing that really conveyed like loving intimacy as well as like ecstatic sexuality that was exciting. Another thing I loved was this element of the uncanny. The protagonist has a relationship with the ghost of Carolee Schneemann. This isn't a fantasy world. This is like a magical realism situation. We don't know to what extent this ghost of Carolee Schneemann character is reflected by the reality of the world of the story. But then also there is the character of the stalker. And as a reader, I was really questioning, is this stalker real in the world of the story, or is the protagonist actually experiencing psychosis? And I personally love that kind of ambiguity and narrative tension. I found that really scintillating and thrilling. Another thing that I noted about the stalker was that at one point on page 149, the close third narration observes about the stalker, Rui Sabine, his gaze had become her own. And that really specifically reminded me of Ways of Seeing by John Berger, which is an art history text in which the author writes about the male gaze and the feminine internalization of the male gaze and performance of femininity to an absent observer, which I learned about actually from Natalie Wynn, ContraPoints, in one of her earlier videos, and I feel like is deeply relevant to all of the themes of this text, which is very much a book about art and women artists and the embodiment of being a woman artist. Speaking of women artists, the artist Anna Mendieta is also referenced in here, and I first learned about her when I like encountered one of her works at the New Museum in New York, which I love, and I'm very haunted by her story, which is that she would make these sculptures symbolizing women's deaths at the hands of abusers, and then she herself died from abuse in a way that eerily echoed the work that she had spent her artistic career creating. Very fascinating. And she is a Cuban artist, I believe. This book also referenced contemporary artist Juno Calypso, whose work I had seen, but I like didn't know her name. And then in looking her up and seeing her dark feminine pink aesthetic, I became obsessed. So I loved the opportunity to be introduced to her. Speaking of being introduced to artists, there is actually a list of works mentioned at the back of the book, which I am so grateful for, because as I was reading and noticing references to various artists, I like wanted to keep track back and look them up, but I didn't want to like interrupt my reading flow, and I also kind of dreaded going back to find them. So I was really happy when I realized that this list was included. I had also been getting the impression while reading that this sort of canon of artistic references with which this text is engaged was very white, and in going through the list of artists and looking them up, I did find that to be true, but not 100% white. From what I can tell, the list of artist reference is about 75% white, and I was introduced to 3 Black visual artists in looking up these references. They are Lulama Wolf, Suchitra Matai, and Shabalala Self, so that was pretty cool. And I definitely 100% recommend this book to weird girl readers. I think that you are going to love Woo Woo by Ella Baxter. Definitely pick this up if this is your kind of thing. I loved my experience reading it. I'm really grateful that I did. And I did also start Pink Slime. I'm on page 30. I am really liking it. It is translated from Spanish. The author is from Uruguay. The dystopian style immediately reminded me of Private Rights by Julia Armfield, which I loved. So I take that to be a very good sign. And something that I loved was in describing the impacts of this dystopian epidemic, which has affected the environment. The protagonist narrator says, "The epidemic had given us back what we thought we lost forever, a country of readers." Love that. And the protagonist's relationship with her mother seems to be a significant one in the story, and I find their relationship dynamic very relatable. There is also another straight relationship in this one, and the dynamic there seems to be much more dysfunctional than the one in Woo Woo, and I'm excited to keep reading this. I will keep you updated. I did also start the ebook of All About Love by Bell Hooks, which to me kind of visually matches this TBR, so I will keep you updated about that as well, and I will talk to you soon. Good morning. I wanted to give you an update on Pink Slime. I have read up till page 120, so I am a bit over halfway. There's like 100 pages left, and I am really appreciating this book. I've really enjoyed reading it. I have been like making my way through it rather quickly, like fog advancing. As the relationship with the protagonist's mother has developed, I found myself relating to that mother-daughter dynamic even more, and just like so deeply on like a soul level, like relating to that. And oh my god, I am so heartbroken. On page 112, I'm almost there, and on page 113, that was the last time I saw her. Devastating. This book was originally published in 2020, and I feel that, and this translation was published in 2024. The story is reminding me of Severance by Ling Ma, which is like a pandemic dystopia set in New York City, but was actually written pre-COVID, interestingly. And there's a lot of beautiful imagery that I'm really liking. On page 59, this idea of a rabbit and a cloud. It's like staring at clouds. They change shape as they move, but if you keep your eyes on them, they seem pretty consistent. That fluffy rabbit is still a rabbit. Maybe it's a little wider, or it has shorter ears and a blurry muzzle. Maybe it's breaking up a bit and has lost its tail or a bit of fur, but you can still see it. On the other hand, if you glance away for just a second and then look back, you won't find any trace of the former rabbit, just a mass of clouds. On page 77, this idea of a girl disguised as a monster, or a monster disguised as a girl, and there not being a distinction between those two possibilities. I was also moved by this idea of the butterfly paradox on page 106. The caterpillar, while it's busy being a caterpillar, can't be a butterfly. And there are also like some interesting political reflections in here, like one on the nature of like care work and nannying specifically. The protagonist reflects that as a nanny, they're paying her for turning her body over to the child, and that they have bought her time and her energy, which I thought was really interesting. I was also compelled by this idea described on page 73 that fear is contagious and spreads from one person to the next, like dominoes falling, and the only way to stop it is to do something radical, disruptive. Also, it turns out the titular pink slime is a reference to meat and a meat factory, which is disgusting, but I think it's supposed to be like disgusting. And what's interesting is that meat is also a theme in Woo Woo, kind of in reference to Carolee Schneeman's Meat Joy, but the protagonist Sabine in this is also making art, like exploring like meat and womanhood and feminism. So there are some interesting connections here about being a woman artist and care work and feminism and the politics of meat. I ended up going to the Brooklyn Museum yesterday and seeing some feminist art, which was really cool, and visiting the dinner party. I'm looking forward to continuing this book and finishing it. I finished Pink Slime. I'm here with my final update, starting with the fact that I finished Intention Obsession, and I loved this book. I gave it 5 stars. I particularly loved Erica Feldman's analysis of the witch trials and how she drew parallels to contemporary injustice, particularly racial profiling and what I would call scapegoating in regard to incarceration and persecution. Really resonated with that. I also loved that she featured Jessie Susanna Carnatz, author of the book Money Witch, which I've read and cannot wait to go back to House Witch in Salem. I really enjoyed the journey through the astrological wheel of the year and just overall loved it, and it made me feel really connected to goddess energy in a magical and sparkly way, which I needed in these Christo-fascist times. Speaking of, after finishing Intention Obsession, I started the audiobook of The Source of Self-Regard by Toni Morrison, and in the opening, which I found to be stunningly resonant for our times, Morrison talks about stillness in the face of mass trauma and how that can either be a like freeze response or art. And I felt that that connected really strongly to Pink Slime, which I would say in many ways is an exploration of the freeze response in the face of mass trauma, and is also art about and in times of mass trauma. And I found so much recognition and comfort and friendship and solidarity in this book, and I loved it. I loved it. I experienced very powerful, synchronous, right book, right time feelings with this book, and I really loved it. I found the like love story element to be very heartbreaking, actually, in terms of the protagonist's continued attachment to her ex-husband. It felt to me like in a way she has been waiting for him as he remains and probably dies in hospital. And I think that there's a really touching sadness to the ways in which we can stop ourselves from living in honor of the grief for those in our lives who have not had the chance to live in the same way that we do. And it kind of moves me to consider how another way to honor those who do not have the chance to live in the way that we do is to live as fully and beautifully as we possibly can. I took note of an image on page 128 of a woman with whom the police are intervening, and she is described as looking like some kind of living statue, and that it is clear to our protagonist that she is also full of rage and had done her best to choose between momentum and paralysis. That image really resonates with me right now. I feel frozen in many ways. I feel full of rage, and I feel a struggle between action and paralysis. And I feel inspired to consider, once our own safety is accounted for, what does courageous action mean or look like? The one thing that I didn't totally resonate with in this book is I feel like there is a kind of othering gaze that is placed upon the character of our protagonist, Charge, the boy that she nannies. He has a medical condition, and I feel like the text is kind of preoccupied with his fatness in a way that feels othering or kind of treats him as a kind of object of fascination rather than a full person with equal subjectivity to the narrator, whose body is not regarded in the same way. So that would be the one thing. And the last thing that I wanted to say was that something fun about reading this as a library book is that I found a little pink star tucked between the pages, and this is exactly the type of thing that when I was a child I would have noted as evidence of the existence of fairies. And I love thinking that someone else who was reading this was using magical pink stars in some kind of craft or spell as they were reading this book. That is all for me today. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed. I would love to know what you are currently reading, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.